She was the one. She was the only one. There have been so many people I've killed over the years. But her, she was the only one who ever escaped. She was the one that got away. I don't blame myself. They were my first murders. Oh, boys and girls, well, she didn't make it easy.
Hi there, my name is Dalfridge, and this is my review for Twisted Metal. I've long been a fan of car combat games. Back when I was younger, I used to rent video games from the video store, and I'd routinely check out Twisted Metal and Twisted Metal World Tour. That's Twisted Metal 2 in the US. I was also a big fan of one of Single Track's other car combat games, Road Trip Vacation 2012, and other games such as Vigilante 8. I skipped over Twisted Metal 3 and 4 and got back into this series for Twisted Metal Black, which in my eyes is the example by which all others are judged, featuring much more elaborate stories for each character and going in a much darker direction. Skip ahead to E3 2010 when a new Twisted Metal is announced. I had been toying with the idea of buying a PS3 for a while as I wanted to play some of the exclusive titles, and when this was announced I bought one a couple of weeks later. I suppose the big question is, was the new Twisted Metal worth buying a new console for?
Turns out, I'm the bad guy. But what if that one jump never happened? What if I could go back and warn you? If I die in this contest, I'm fine with that. Hell, I'll welcome it. But if I win, I'm going back to stop him from trying that jump. I'm going back to save his life. And maybe then, my life will turn out different.
This entry in the Twisted Metal series sees quite a few changes compared to previous entries. Instead of picking a character with a specific vehicle, there are now 3 gangs. These are the Clowns led by Sweet Tooth, the Skulls led by Mr. Grimm, and the Dolls led by Dollface. There's also a gang called the Holy Men led by Preacher, however this gang does not have its own campaign and is only really in the multiplayer. Rather than picking a single vehicle for the entire campaign like we are used to, in most levels you pick 3 vehicles which you swap in a garage. If you die in the chosen vehicle you have to restart the level, but if you get to the garage in time and swap out, your new vehicle will have full health. Which vehicle you wish to pick is not restricted by the gang you're playing as, and this allows for a much more tactical way of playing. Rather than having to rely on the one vehicle you chose, you can now start with a high armor vehicle, then once that has nearly died you can swap to a fast vehicle and mop up the last few kills. Seeing as the new vehicle system is a lot less restricted than in previous games, it's surprising that the campaign forces you to play as each gang in a set order. From the start you play as Sweet Tooth, followed by Mr. Grimm, and finally as Dollface. What makes little sense about this is the stories don't flow sequentially. You're told at the start of the first boss fight that if Mr. Grimm's gang wins this match, then he'll win the chance to enter the competition next year, so it makes no sense that Mr. Grimm's campaign follows Sweet Tooth's. As there is a prescribed order to the campaigns, it would have made more sense for there to be some cohesion between them. Another shift away from previous Twisted Metal titles is the style of the levels. In the past we'd just be dumped into a battleground and told to take out the requisite number of enemies. Now there's usually some form of challenge to each level, such as stay within a certain area or you'll start taking damage, or all the enemies will rush at you. There's even a race level for each story and proper boss levels. These boss levels are a major departure from what we're used to. Gone are the old styles of just having one really hard enemy in a standard arena which you fight in the usual manner. Now we have multi-stage fights against giant enemies. The first fight is the simplest, being against 2 monster trucks. When you kill one of them, the other puts up huge armour shields so you have to drive under the truck, deploy a minion, and survive long enough to let them plant the bomb and blow the armour off, before finally having to fight the remaining truck. The second boss involves a chase with a giant mecha Dollface, and the third fight is essentially against a moving carnival, both of which get more complicated the later you go on. While these more complicated boss fights are good, you're often given little direction. This isn't too much of a problem as they are generally fairly intuitive, but occasionally I found myself stuck not knowing what to do. Also, these complicated boss fights should not be confused with hard ones. Each of the bosses are fairly easy once you work out what you need to do, and the hardest level of the game is one of the regular levels called Ghost Town Gulch. The campaigns are fairly short. In total it took me around 6 hours, but that is including the times I got stuck on certain levels. If you're actually any good at this game, it'll be even less than that. To be fair to Twisted Metal, David Jaffe said long before launch that the campaign was not the focal point of this game, as the focus would be the multiplayer. This is still a shame for those of us that enjoyed the previous campaigns. For me, Twisted Metal has always been about finishing the game with each character to see the ending, and whilst the gameplay changes have led to a more sophisticated Twisted Metal, it's a shame there weren't more stories included.
Black Rock Stadium. I have to tell you, and this is just between you and I designed this arena to bring about the greatest loss of life in the shortest amount of time. It's like a slaughterhouse, but for people. I'm actually quite proud of it. Now, if you want to survive, beware the traps. And beware of the dangers. And be ready for the layout to change lickety-split. I love that term.
There are a number of other updated mechanics this time around. For starters, each vehicle now has 2 special attacks. Some of these are a modified version of the main attack, such as Meat Wagon, who can either shoot an explosive gurney or alternate special and remote control the gurney. Other vehicles have massive differences between the specials, like Sweet Tooth, whose first special is to fire the iconic clown head from the top of his truck, but his second special transforms him into a robot able to fly around the maps. There has also been a change to the alternate attacks of the shield, freeze and mines, in that previously they were hidden commands, but now they're just assigned to the D-pad. Each of these attacks shares a small energy meter which recharges over time. Exactly how much time is a hidden stat of which a few things are governed by. Each vehicle is openly ranked by armour, speed and their special weapon damage, but they also have some hidden stats such as handling, turbo usage, ram damage and speed they feed the enemy faction leader into the grinder during nuke mode. On a slightly more familiar note, there are 8 different battlegrounds to fight on, which in the campaign are obviously set out as the levels. In the multiplayer you can choose between different portions of each battleground as your arena, which are usually the choice of an extra large map of the entire battleground, and then several small subsections which can be large, small or extra small. Each battleground has its own quirks and themes just like we're used to. There is the standard rooftop level, which this time around is an amalgamation of rooftop levels from the past. There are levels like Blackrock Stadium, which features lava pits and various traps and pitfalls, and there are more traditional levels set out in the suburbs. After each of these levels you now unlock something new rather than having to find secrets or completing the campaigns. This ranges from new vehicles to new sidearms to upgrades to the alternate attacks. These new sidearms are more than just upgrades to mounted guns, instead you get new weapons such as shotguns and a magnum, each with a large difference in usage. There are also hidden unlocks for satisfying specific criteria which are relatively hard to get.
Good, Maya. Great. Client's gonna love this.
They all try to stop me. They all want to be me. Excuse me, Maya? But that's okay. It just makes me want to work harder.
Good, Krista. Great. Client's gonna love this.
The controls are a little bit awkward, and this doesn't seem to make much difference between which control scheme you use. You can either use classic controls which are great for combat but inconvenient to drive with, racing controls which are great for driving control but not great for shooting, or twin stick controls which are just all around awkward. You do get used to whichever control scheme you find best, and part of this will depend on if you've played a lot of the previous games, but it does make it fairly hard to get into if you're new to the series, or if it has been a while since you last played. Getting used to your control scheme can be challenging as well due to the frantic nature of the gameplay, and some of the more frustrating parts. This is all part of the learning curve, but the fast action makes this pretty steep, to the point that I often forgot about my alternate attacks and abilities. It wasn't until partway through Dollface's campaign I remembered to start using the shield, for example. This is probably highlighted the most, alongside the awkward controls, in the race levels. The races bring out nearly all the frustrating parts in one neat package. Unless using the race controls it's very difficult to keep control of your car. The loose physics mean that as a faster, lighter car, you can get bashed around all over the place, and as this is a race you will be a lighter, faster car. And to top it all off, the race layouts aren't particularly intuitive, so you tend to rely more on blind luck or learning the layouts of the tracks. This isn't a massive deal as there are only 3 races in the game, 1 for each campaign, but they do highlight a number of the game's flaws. Perhaps the biggest flaw is with the voice acting. Both the cutscenes and the introductions to each level feature a number of terrible moments, in particular from Calypso himself. While it is a little distracting, it is easy to ignore and something I can completely forgive due to the soundtrack, which features the likes of Rob Zombie, White Zombie and Sammy Hagar. Those of us that remember Twisted Metal Black for its excellent use of Paint It Black by the Rolling Stones will probably find the use of heavy metal rather familiar.
All of us models had heard of him, able to turn even the ugliest girl into a star. He had lost some of his vision, along with his right to practice. But when he offered to help, what choice did I have? 6 days in the mask, he said. 6 days. The doctor promised it would be beautiful again.
The multiplayer game modes feature some that are very familiar and some which are newer to the franchise. As usual, we have the deathmatch mode, which is for up to 16 players at once, and this can be played either free-for-all or in teams. There's also a last man standing mode, which can also be played free-for-all or in teams. In this mode you have a set number of lives and the last person alive is crowned the winner. You then have two more objective-based game modes called Hunted and Nuke. In Hunted, one player is marked for everyone else to kill. The hunted player gains points by killing the other players, whose goal is to kill them, causing them to be the next hunted player. Finally, in Nuke, you play in teams and have to kidnap the opposing team's faction leader, drag them to the grinder, and sacrifice them to fire a nuclear missile. Whoever launches the missile must then pilot it to the enemy statue for a point. Teams switch between offense and defense, and the winner is the one with the most points at the end. Each of these multiplayer game types is a lot of fun depending on what kind of competitive multiplayer you enjoy. Speaking as someone that's never played a Twisted Metal game online before, and being more of a split-screen player back in the day, it's nice to see the series evolve beyond the strict deathmatch setting I was used to. Of course, those of us still into split-screen gaming can still play this way in this Twisted Metal, and there's also a LAN option for that larger in-person multiplayer experience. One of the final things I need to mention is regarding the censorship in the European version of the game. Thankfully this time around we got away okay with the censorship. There have been some changes, such as the Corpse and Shadows special being immobile, whereas in the American version of the game he's writhing around, and the removal of the man trapped in Junkyard Dog's taxicab, but these are rather minor. I did also read that the cutscenes have been trimmed down a little, which is a shame. However, you won't notice them unless you YouTube the uncensored versions. I only know this due to a post I read on Twisted Metal Alliance. As much as the idea that we got a cut down version is kind of annoying, at least we actually get the cutscenes this time around, unlike in Twisted Metal Black. It's been nearly 10 years since I last played a new Twisted Metal game, and I have to say it was worth the wait. Perhaps it was a little bit overboard to buy a PS3 mostly for this game, but it's not a decision I regret. My only hope is that as well as the rumoured DLC vehicles such as Twister and Pit Viper, we also get some expansion on the stories present here. The epilogues in particular set up some interesting new characters I'd love to see more of.